How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is RuffledRowlit, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk about some things. Ladies and gentlemen, today we got some stuff to talk about that I think is going to be quite interesting. We're going to be talking about the connection seemingly that does exist between the Galar region and the Unova region. So I've talked about this kind of seemingly a bit here and there in a few of my videos. I made a video about this a long time ago now. It's been over 2 months now since I talked about this. Around the time the games got revealed, I actually had a theory that was sent to me by a viewer, which also talked about the connections between the Galar region seemingly and also Unova. Now, I do have another theory from that individual, which I'm going to get to a bit later, because it's a little bit more like it's a pretty long one. I'm going to say it's a pretty chunky, big thing to go through. So I'm going to go through that, separately. But today I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about something that's been discovered within Pokemon, specifically Pokemon Black and White. And that's something that actually shows up that I didn't think about much before. It was sent to me by a viewer, and I remember seeing it when it was sent to me by a viewer, and I always kind of told myself I'm going to talk about it eventually, right? I'm going to go through this topic at a certain point of time. I'm going to actually bring it up. And that time is now, because I rediscovered this topic again. I totally forgotten about it, but I rediscovered it thanks to some people over on Reddit who actually talked about this topic as well, though they didn't really go in depth on it, just kind of mentioned it, kind of like passingly by, they just kind of brought it up, and then it just kind of like left people's, attention spans, to put it bluntly. It just wasn't really, continued further than that. So I thought we'd talk about that today, go through it and see what it's all about, because we're talking about the Unova World Tournament. Now, I'm going to pop up here on the screen somewhere. I'll probably move myself to the side, and I'll put the thing on the screen so you guys can see what we're talking about. But basically, in specifically Unova, you've got the, World Tournament, which is, you guys remember how the World Tournament worked back then. We got the World Tournament there, and the thing with the World Tournament was that it was just kind of this, place where you could battle, trainers from the past and that sort of stuff. And what's interesting about the place there, and when you look at the entrance to it, is that it has a few things that are very reminiscent to the Galar region. And we're going to start from the bottom here. You'll see the actual thing on the side here, and we're going to kind of, circle in the areas that are, meant to be paid attention to. So we're going to start with the bottom part here, which is going to be the two statues. Now, you may not notice it at first glance, but if we zoom in on these statues, let's start with the one that's furthest to the left. Now, if you look at this, what does this kind of remind you of? You might be a little bit confused. You might be thinking, okay, well, it just looks like a, a big old blob, like a gray blob holding some sort of green, thing in its hands. Well, let's look at the other one, right? Now, if you look at the other one, right, you see how the thing it's holding is slightly bigger and more, roundish, kind of more bigger scale, so to say? Well, look at them at the same time. Those are a sword and a shield being held by these characters. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, right in front of you, right there, what you are seeing is two statues with characters holding a sword and a shield in Unova. Yes, in freaking Unova, of all places. I was so surprised when I first saw this, but I didn't really put much attention to it, because I was like, okay, well, it's just, it is what it is, right? But then when I look back at it, I realized even more things along the way. There's even more to this than just that. There is way more stuff in here, just in this one image, you'll notice. So let's go a bit further in and look at what else is in here. Well, if you zoom up to the top part of this image, notice what you have on the wall right here. You've got two banners. Now, these banners are two particular colors. They're red and they're blue. Now, here's the thing. Red and blue is a constant within the Pokemon universe. You've got red, blue, in the past, the Pokemon games. Of course, you had green, but green is on the sideline. Let's not talk about green. Green is green. Who cares about green? But you've got, right, red and blue with the original games. You've got Ruby, Sapphire being red and blue for those. Ruby being red and Sapphire being blue. And, of course, Emerald being green, which, let's not talk about Emerald, even though we love Emerald. But then we, as we kind of get further and further ahead, the kind of blue and red kind of theme disappeared for a while. We didn't see that. Like, for Generation 4, there was really none of that there. Generation 2 really didn't have it either. It was kind of every other generation it kind of followed that theme. So, like, what? Gen 1 had it. Gen 2 didn't have it. Gen 2 was, like, gold and silver. Gen 3 had it because it was Ruby, Sapphire. Gen 4 was more, like, bluish and kind of pinkish. So it wasn't exactly the same. And then we go into Generation 5 where it's black and white, right? There's no real connections there besides this. Here, we see the red and blue theme kind of brought up again. And which game that's coming out right now has that same red and blue theme? And I'm not talking about red and blue as in Kanto. I'm talking about red and blue as in just the colors being represented. Well, that's going to be Galar's Sword and Shield. You got Pokemon Sword, Pokemon Shield. Pokemon Sword is blue, Pokemon Shield is more like reddish pinkish, right? And the thing I'm trying to get to here is that I think this could potentially hint at a connection between the two regions. Now, in what sense could the connection be? You know, you could look at it from many different perspectives, right? Perspective number one, this could be a direct connection, right? Which means that the connections is in terms of history. The regions are connected, which means we could see some, Galar Pokemon that are actually from Unova, or vice versa. You know, it could be any way. Whichever way you want to look at it. Actually, it wouldn't be able to be vice versa. Rather, we might see some Unova Pokemon that have different forms for the Galar region, because maybe they're originally from the Galar region, you know, they're Galarian forms, they're actually originally from Galar region, but then they were taken to Unova when, hypothetically, through a theory that I made a while back, hypothetically, if the Unovan people are actually originally the Galarian people, then logically it would make sense that if a few people from the, that region, the Generation 5 region of Unova, were brought there from Galar, it would make sense that they're different and over history have changed based on their nature. Because Unova is more like, like what? East Coast United States with like, different kind of weather, weathers and a little bit of a mixture. It's like East Coast United States, while Galar is United Kingdom. Those are two different kind of like, places. It's totally different kind of, avenues of weather and everything, right? Sure, there's a little bit of similarities where like a bunch of rain and shit, but the point I'm trying to get to is that they're two different places with two different like environments. And of course, a Pokemon, as we've seen, will change based on its environment, right? And how long it stays within those places. If you look at Rattata, right, in Alola, it changes to a dark type because it hides a lot in the shadows and, that sort of stuff. Whereas, other Pokemon may turn into different, they change due to the environment. So I think this could mean that potentially we may see some Unova Pokemon in Galar in their original true form. Maybe even in their ancient forms, as some people have suggested, because that's a rumor that's been floating around about ancient form Pokemon or whatever. And like forms of Pokemon that are, in their original state. That actually would make a lot of sense as well. But that's not all, though. I've talked about this theory before, and this idea that if they were the people who traveled away from there, then this could be playing off of the real-world history of how the United States were basically the colony of the United States originally, which is what it was. It was like colonized by British people, right? The British, or people from like, that isle, went to the United States, or to America, and they colonized it. And eventually, over time, as you guys may remember in terms of history, the taxes got too high. The Americans didn't like that because they weren't getting anything out of it. They're giving their money and higher taxes each and every single day, higher taxes to a king they didn't know. Because this was several generations after they had, left their original home country of the United Kingdom. This is far after, home of Britain, I guess, not home, like United Kingdom, I guess, whichever way you want to, put it. My point is this, though. It was no longer a place they belonged to. It was no longer their home. Their home was now America. That was their home. These colonies and, these states that were starting to be created, that was their home. And they didn't want to give money to a guy they didn't care for or didn't have anything to do. Hence why they, went through a revolution to get their own country. And that's how the United States, they fought against the British. They fought them away and got help from the French. And eventually, boom, they got their own country. And now they're good allies. Sure, in long gone history, they were enemies, but now they're good allies. The same way, if you look at the United Kingdom and France, they're good allies now, but through history, they have been brutal enemies. They have been brutally savage against each other and constantly been in conflict. They have not had a good time together. But nowadays, they're stable. They're both stable countries that support each other and are financially, financially influence each other and have a direct connection, right? They're directly connected to each other. They have a lot of political alliances, whereas in the past, they would never really have done as much of that. I mean, sure, there was a lot of political stuff that happened where, France takes a little bit of the UK takes a little bit of France, they send kings and queens and whatnot, princes and whatnot back and forth. It was a little bit of a cluster, let's just put it that way. But through history, they've always been in conflict. They've always been kind of like warring nations and that sort of stuff. So the point I'm trying to get to here, the eventual point, is that we could be seeing the same thing happening here, that the Unovan people were part of Galar. They moved from the Galar region to colonize some new place, a new region, which was Unova. They colonized it, but then they were forced to, maybe follow this leader in the Galar or pitch in, for example, into the Galarian, like, campaigns, you know, against the Kalos region, which is the closest region seemingly to the Galar region, they maybe had to pitch into the campaign there, but they were like, we don't want to do that. We're not part of you anymore. We're in our own place here, so we want to be our own people. And that's maybe what ended up happening. Now, something else you will notice about specifically Unova is there's tons of connections to dragons. And dragons are very big in the Galar region. We will notice, as you can see, that there's literally a city that's a dragon. It's shaped after a dragon, fully, right? So there's a lot of connections to dragons seemingly in Galar based on just the small info we've gotten, and also due to the fact that it's based in the UK, and so the UK does have a lot of, you know, folklore and history about dragons and stuff. It would 100% make sense, in just my humble opinion, that these two are connected. Unova has tons of dragon connections. Tons of it. Tons of it. And then you've got yourself Galar, which has the same thing going on, with literally a city shaped after a dragon. Okay? So, what's the end goal here if they are connected? Well, I think the end goal for me would be to see a bunch of features from Unova included over here. One of those features is, for example, difficulty modes. In the, you know, Unova games, or Black and White, if you actually beat the game, you can unlock a difficulty mode, right? And that sort of stuff. I'd love to see that be moved over. So, because I think these two games can mirror each other a lot. For example, if we look at the Unova region, right, you had a bunch of brand new Pokemon. The whole region was just brand new Pokemon. It couldn't have any of the previous generation Pokemon until at the end of the game. Whereas in Galar, we won't have that, but maybe we'll have an equal amount of brand new Pokemon as we had in Unova. Just a plethora of new ones. That's very possible. 3. The World Tournament. That could be returning. I personally like the World Tournament. I think it was a cool feature to have, and I think they can definitely return that, 100% return that for the Galar region. I mean, sure, I think majority of us would prefer if we got something like, you know, the Battle Frontier and that sort of stuff, but I think the World Tournament would be good enough as well. I think it would fit in well and that sort of stuff. So I think that could definitely work as well. But in general terms, I think this opens up the possibility of a lot of features and stuff from Unova showing up over here, or even possibly new forms of Pokemon from the Unova region that were maybe originally from Galar that look different from there. For example, let's say we have a Pokemon in Unova that looks a specific way there, like Haxorus or something, right? Maybe it looks a specific way in Unova because it's evolved to fit with the environment of Unova, whereas the original form of it looks way different back in Galar. And I think that would be actually a really cool thing for them to do if they actually went down that path. So ladies and gentlemen, let me know in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions about this topic? Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. And bye-bye, ladies and gentlemen.